Welcome into course number 102 here at sormena.org, producing on a budget the DAW and Freeware. I'm going to be your guide throughout this course, Brian Bowman, and I have to say right off the bat, I'm super excited for what we're going to be covering in the next several weeks. Normally, with videos on the internet and even some courses, the DAW is kind of the thing that's specified. So you might come across a video from a producer you really like and they're working in Ableton Live, and you're like, wait a minute, I use Ableton Live. But as the video is going on, you start to realize, wait a minute, he or she might have more plugins than I have, or where did those samples come from? Are they from Ableton? Are they from a third source? Did this person record the samples that they're using? And or they might be using the program, the DAW, in a way that you're not really familiar with. And so when they're doing that, you start to get a little bit frustrated and confused, and you think, wait a minute, I thought we were using the same program. But then you realize, maybe not so much. So in this course, we're actually going to look at it from a different perspective, which is we're really going to limit the tools that we're using, and it's all going to be freeware stuff. But the choice of DAW is 100% up to you. And the main reason for doing this is so it doesn't seem like it's so much alchemy to making a particular style of music or sound. What I'm most excited about is the end of this course, when we're able to go through and listen to each other's works and hear the directions that people have gone using the exact same tools. Also, with courses on DAWs and that whole sort of a thing, when you have a question, like, hey, what does this button do? It's very easy for you to go online and get the answer to that question. It's probably in the manual, or if you just search it in Google, I'm sure you'll get the answer in, 15 or 20 seconds. But on Sormena, we're really a lot more about making music, coming up with your unique sound, your style. And so when you run into roadblocks and you ask questions, they're going to be a lot more about sort of like the actual making of the music process. And answering those questions is a lot more difficult, but that's sort of the goal and idea of this website, as opposed to saying, hey, what does this button do? What does that button do, etc. So, prerequisites for this course. If you're brand new to making music, you don't even know what a DAW is at this point, I really would strongly encourage you go through the 101 course, because we're going to do very little recap of the stuff that was covered in there. So if you don't really have a good grasp or understanding of what a DAW can do, its different features, etc., you're going to want to go through that course, because that really lays the groundwork for pretty much every single DAW that's available on the market today. If you don't want to go through that course, that's totally fine, but I do expect that you have a basic understanding of a basic digital audio workstation environment, and specifically the one that you want to use and are going to be working with. And even if you don't have the firmest grasp on it, that is okay, because you can, like I said before, find a lot of great free resources already for the DAW that you're working with if you do have questions like, what does this button do? What does that knob do? And so forth. What do you need for this course? Pretty simple. All you need is a standalone DAW of your choice that's capable of hosting VST or AU plugins, and you want to make sure that that DAW gives you unlimited number of audio or instrument tracks, and also unlimited number of plugin slots. It does the latter one not as important, but the former one very important. You never want to be limited by the number of tracks that you can put down when you're making a song. In some ways, that's a good thing if you're setting the limit, but if you're not setting the limit and the program is doing it for you, you could be making a lot of progress and then suddenly just hit a wall because you've run out of tracks. If a freeware DAW existed that was available for both Mac and Windows, gave you unlimited plugin slots and also unlimited tracks, I would be using that in this course. But I think after going through the 101 course, if you're still really amped and enthusiastic about making music, you do want to invest in a standalone DAW, one that's full featured, because that's going to be the center point. It's going to be the nucleus for all of the music that you make moving forward. So a little bit about this course. what are we going to be covering in the next several weeks. The first one is actually quite simple. If you were with us in 101, we were working in the web-based programs, Soundation and Audio Tool, but now we're going to be transitioning into a standalone DAW, an actual application that you open up, doesn't require the internet to run. And because of that, there's going to be a lot more of preferences and menus and things that you can configure. But really, we're going to be using mostly the same preferences that we saw inside of Soundation or Audio Tool. So not going to be that difficult of a transition for us. A big talking point, something that's kind of major throughout the course and throughout the entire website, is limiting your choices. In this course, that's very literal because I will be saying, here is the next plugin that you're going to install and that you're going to be working with, So that's going to be very literal, but overall, we'll also talk about limiting your choices and how that can kind of help you make a little bit more music. It helps you not get derailed quite as often if you have just a ton of things that you can use right away. So that's another aspect that's kind of unique about this course, because normally after you've worked in something like Soundation or Audio Tool, I would encourage you to just work in your DAW with all the features that it gives you. But nowadays with DAWs, they actually sometimes come with gigabytes and gigabytes of samples and a lot of different instruments and a lot of different options and preferences. So this is going to be kind of cool. We're really limiting ourselves just to these very specific tools and very specific samples. And then last but not least, you will be creating your own piece of music as part of the final project. Next, let's talk about some of the topics a little bit more specifically. We're going to begin with the evolution of the DAW, and by extension to that, a little bit on the history of recording. It is useful to understand how we've gotten to where we are today and how the technology has kind of developed really rapidly over the past 15 or 20 years. So we'll be doing that to kick off this course. We'll also talk about DAW selection. So if you haven't picked a digital audio workstation yet, going to try to break that down for you just a little bit. I have absolutely zero preference in what you choose to use because really most of these DAWs are doing similar things. So whatever you use really shouldn't be that big of a hindrance to you trying to make the music that you want to make. We'll also have a bit on studio technology. That goes hand in hand with history of recording. So we'll talk about some of the hardware, why it was developed, and then eventually how it's been emulated into plugin form, which you can now use. And we'll use a few studio technology emulations inside of this course. So look forward to that. We'll also have a basic introduction to mixing. So once you finish your track and you feel like it's all done and dusted, it actually isn't. You're going to load it all back up again as audio files, audio stems, and you might take a crack at trying to make the pieces fit a little bit better together. So we'll have an introduction to mixing, nothing too formal. There will be an entire course dedicated to mixing perspectives much later on here. So you can look forward to that if you enjoy that part of the course. And then there also will be a bonus section, which is titled Going Outside the Box. And that's a little bit confusing. I don't mean outside the box as in outside the computer to use hardware. What I actually mean is taking some of these tools that we're using in their typical fashion. So if you have like an EQ, a channel strip EQ, you're probably going to use that to gently massage the frequency spectrum of the different instruments to make them all sound better together. But we might use that EQ in a really drastic and extreme and crazy way, or use many EQs like in series or in parallel, which you really can't do so much outside of the computer. So we'll talk about getting really creative a little bit and using things beyond their intended purposes. Final project, it's exactly the same as it was for course 101. I want you to make a track using the tools provided for you throughout this course. And like I said in the first slide, I really cannot wait to hear all the different directions people go with exactly the same tools. And we all know the same tools that we're using. So it's really cool. It kind of demystifies a lot of things, like watching people on the internet make tracks in a certain genre and style. And you think, oh my gosh, I need all of these samples and all these plugins. Not true at all, and I think it's going to be made crystal clear when we listen to what everybody's made. That track can be any style, it can be any duration. And then an optional second project will be to mix a track. So I will provide stems to something that I make. I'm going to intentionally leave it very unrefined. a little bit loose around the edges. So I'll give you the opportunity to mix it. And again, you'll hear the different directions people go. And I think that's going to be really cool as well. And if you want, you can also allow people to download stems to a track that you've made for the course if you want other people to take a crack at mixing it, just to hear the directions that people go. We'll talk a lot more about that when we actually get there here in the course, but those are going to be the final projects for course number 102. So let's begin, jump into week 1. I'm really looking forward to this one, and I hope you are too. Take care.